Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. This is our May 21st, 2021 legislative update. Hope everyone is starting to transition back to normal life and that the COVID pandemic is starting to recede wherever you are. Here in Washington, we are in full summer mode. Congress, this kind of April through June is kind of the busiest legislative time of the year. Everything that Congress wants to work on is still live. This is when, if they want to get things passed, they have to do kind of the hard work of legislating. And we've certainly seen that in the last couple of weeks. So there's a lot going on, but we're going to focus our discussion today on the Endless Frontier Act. As you'll recall from previous updates, the Endless Frontier Act was IEEE-USA's top legislative priority this year. It was proposed as a $100 billion research bill, focused particularly on technology, and had some very innovative programs to change how the U.S. government funded innovation and what the government did with that innovation once they had it. In just the last week or so, however, the Endless Frontier Act is no more. The Senate has changed the name of the bill, and they've also changed the structure of the bill. So we're going to go through all that, but we'll start with a little bit of history. Today, May 21st, is the anniversary of the very first Democratic Presidential Convention, 1832 in Baltimore. That was the convention that nominated Andrew Jackson for a second term and Martin Van Buren for his first term as president. Every state sent a delegate except for Missouri, which had just entered the Union as a state. This was not the first presidential convention. Both the Anti-Federalists and the Republican Party, or the beginnings of the Republican Party, had held a presidential convention the previous year, but not on May 21st. And so this is not only the first Democratic presidential convention, but it is the first successful presidential convention in the sense that Andrew Jackson did, in fact, win a second term. And Martin Van Buren, of course, went on to become president after him. So for those of political junkies, this is a big day in the evolution of America's political system. More on current point, the Endless Frontier Act has been renamed by the Senate. The bill emerged from the Senate committee and has now moved to the Senate floor, where we're expecting a vote next week. But it has been renamed the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, the USICA. Not quite as eloquent as the Endless Frontier Act, but that's okay. The bill was comprehensively amended. It was actually amended in the form of a substitution, in the sense that they just rewrote the whole thing by a vote of 71 to 27, which you will note is a lot. The bill requires 60 votes to pass because of the filibuster, and they have it. And so the expectation now is that the USICA will pass the Senate fairly easily when it finally comes up for a vote next week. Just a couple caveats, which we'll get to on there. There were significant changes to the bill. We're going to go through some of them, but many of the key provisions that caused IEEE-USA to support the bill last year, and then again this year, are still there, although some cases in a slightly different form. The bill does create the new Technology and Innovation Directorate within the NSF, which is a significant change in NSF policy. It maintains the regional tech hubs and other tech transfer programs, which we'll talk more about in a second, and continues to prioritize geographic and demographic diversity within the research community. What I mean by that is one of the most attractive parts of the Endless Frontier Act is that it forced the regional technology hubs and other infrastructure programs that they created out of the tech centers of the country and into the rest of the nation. The regional tech hubs in particular, the law was very clear. They have to be built, they have to be dispersed across the country, but also built in places that are not current technology hubs, which will push the benefits of technological innovation more deeply into the country. The bill also includes a number of programs to help train Americans to participate in STEM fields. Those programs are aimed at university folks, college graduates, postdocs, but also have programs for people who did not go to college. People went to community college or just some sort of training or apprenticeship program, which we think is fantastic. So the bill does, the US ICA still does maintain many of the programs that made the bill so attractive to us originally. A little more detail on one of those is sizable investments in technology transfer programs. $9.4 billion for the Regional Technology Hub program that will create between 10 and 15 regional technology hubs to help move ideas out of academia, out of national labs, into the private market, where they can create jobs and companies and new products for existing companies, and generally make sure that the public, society at large, benefits from the research that's being done at our national labs and at universities. We have, so Regional Technology Strategy Grant Program helps the regions where the regional technology hubs are located, other regions as well, but the idea is they'll go together, help those regions capitalize on their innovation assets. The idea is investing money to help local communities, regions that aren't currently innovation leaders, identify the assets they have, identify university programs that are competitive, companies that are innovative, and build a regional strategy around them to attract more innovation to that particular region. More money for the Manufacturing USA program, which is an existing program that provides assistance to companies to use federal resources and facilities to do research for their products. Basically, it's designed to be used by smaller and mid-sized companies who, for example, can't afford their own supercomputer, but can benefit from getting access to one. And so the program gives smaller companies the ability to use federal research assets for their own purposes, which is good. $4 billion to help transfer academic research out of the universities into the private sector, and just under $3 billion for technology test beds around the country. All of which is really exciting, excuse me, and should do wonders to improve kind of the weakest part of our innovation ecosystem. Universities, national labs are very good at coming up with good ideas. American private sector is really good at creating products, and marketing products and generating economic growth. But the gap between the two has always been a problem. The bill now aims to solve that, or at least make it less bad, by investing in these programs to pull ideas into the private sector, which is quite exciting, actually. Should increase the efficiency of our research, getting more societal benefit for the same amount of investment. However, the big change in the bill going from the Endless Frontier Act to the US ICS is the funding. Originally, the Endless Frontier Act primarily funded the new technology directorate at the NSF. Not quite so much anymore. Instead of getting around $100 billion, the new bill gives the new technology directorate $29 billion, which, is a lot less, but still a lot of money. We don't want to discount that. However, out of the $29 billion will come many of the other programs that we think are important, including the innovation centers, which get $9.5-ish billion of the $29 billion. Funding for scholarships, fellowships will consume $5 billion. The academic technology transfer program will take money out of this. The test beds will. There's also a charge of 10% of the directorate funding to encourage and promote interagency cooperation in the innovation space, which again, it's a good idea, but it is reducing the amount of money the new tech directorate has, so that in the end, our new directorate will only have about $4.25 billion to spend on research, which is considerably less than the original bill. But it's still a lot of money. $4.25 billion is still sizable and should make a difference. What's notable, however, are the new funding priorities in the Endless Frontier Act. The Department of Energy Office of Science secured just under $17 billion for the national labs. That was particularly the work of senators in Tennessee and New Mexico, which have very large national labs. And the NSF itself will receive $51 billion for its existing programs. So on the one hand, IEEE-USA was very excited about the new directorate and the work it could do and kind of the new approach it was going to take towards research. On the other hand, Department of Energy's Office of Science is a great agency. They do fantastic work. And the NSF, of course, itself does great work. And so it's not as though this money is being wasted. It's going to useful things, but it will reduce the impact of the new technology directorate, at least originally. Worth pointing out that all of these dollar amounts are 5-year numbers. So you take each one of these numbers, divide it by 5, more or less, and that's how much the programs will get each year. It doesn't actually work out that way. The tech directorate, all the budgets scale up over time. So next year they get relatively small budgets, and 5 years from now they get bigger budgets, but you get the general idea. So what's going on here? Well, a couple things. First, the House Science Committee is moving. There is an Endless Frontier Act in the House, but right now the attention is on the NSF reauthorization bill that's moving through the House Science Committee. Eddie Bernice Johnson, Congresswoman from Texas, chair of the Science Committee, has made it clear that this reauthorization bill is her priority and that she was saying she was against the Endless Frontier Act. Now she's saying she's not against it, but she's not going to prioritize it. And so the House is sending clear signals to the Senate that they have a different approach to research funding. The House Science Committee's basic approach is more money for NSF, not a lot of money for new programs. Senator Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader and champion of Endless Frontier Act, is setting his bill up to win a conference committee vote. The Senate will pass its version of the bill next week. The House will pass the NSF reauthorization bill. The expectation is that those two bills will be conferenced, that is combined, into one final bill that the House and Senate would then pass to send to the president. Senator Schumer has adjusted his bill to make it closer to the NSF reauthorization bill being considered in the House while still maintaining the programs that he wants to prioritize, which from his perspective is the new technology directorate. Politically speaking, it is much easier to get more funds for an existing program than to get any funds for a program that doesn't exist. What Senator Schumer has done is he's sacrificed kind of the immediate financial strength of the technology directorate to make it easier for him to get it created. Once the directorate is created, it will be much easier to get budget for it down the line. And so Senator Schumer has successfully positioned the bill to pass the Senate. More on how he did that in a second. And he's now started to think about how he can move it in the House so that a bill actually becomes law. It's worth noting that the dialogue, the public dialogue and private dialogue between the House and the Senate on this bill a couple weeks ago was almost hostile. Not quite, but getting close. Both sides have backed off, and the discussion they're now having resembles a negotiation as opposed to opposition, which suggests both sides are ready to cut a deal, and now they're just positioning to get as much of what they want as they can. So the risks to the Endless Frontier Act at the moment, there's two. One is this House-Senate split. Even though it looks like both sides are interested in a deal, that doesn't mean they're going to be able to reach one. But I think the bigger problem is baggage. Most people in Washington think this bill is going to pass, and it probably will. As a result, senators, to start with, have added to the bill a huge number of kind of extraneous provisions, which we'll talk about in a second. Other bills, other ideas that weren't in the original bill. When the Endless Frontier Act was introduced last year, it was about 250 pages long. Now it's passing 1,500 pages long. Now, so far, these additional provisions have been broadly popular. Senator Schumer has done a very good job so far of keeping out poison pills, pieces of legislation, provisions, laws that would cause controversy that could derail the entire bill. For example, there was a push to include some immigration provisions in the bill. That did not happen. Any immigration provision in the bill would have put the whole bill at risk. Senator Schumer knows that, and so he kept it out. However, there are possibilities that down the line provisions will be added that will cause problems and controversy. Moreover, the bill is getting really expensive. There are a lot of provisions in here that spend money, new money, and at some point you got to think that maybe Congress needs to pull back. There is a limit on how much the federal government can borrow. It's worth noting that all the numbers I've given you so far are authorization numbers, not appropriation numbers. This still has to go through the appropriation process to actually get money to spend. So the final numbers will be different. And there is some concern that the Appropriations Committee will be less generous than the authorizing committees, as they usually are. I want to look at some of those kind of extraneous provisions. This is a partial list taken directly from congress.gov of other bills that have been tacked on to the Endless Frontier Act. The Combating Sexual Harassment in Science Act, which is a good thing. The Supporting Early Career Researchers Act, Advancing Technology Manufacturing Act. This, like I said, this is a partial list, but you can see there's a lot of different ideas in here. So far, all of them are things that IEEE-USA can support, with the possible exception of the Shark Fin Sale Elimination Act, which bans the sale of shark fins. We're not in favor of shark fins. We just don't have a position on it. But as you can see, at least all of these have some tangential connection to the Endless Frontier Act's original idea, which was mostly Senator Schumer's doing. Let's look at a couple more specific ones. The CHIPS Act, or CHIPS Acts, because there's a couple of them floating around now. The issue here is that there is a shortage of computer chips in this country that's starting to affect manufacturers, particularly car manufacturers, which is why both senators from Michigan are big on this. And there's concerns about our continued reliance on China for sensitive computer technology. So the USICA, the Endless Frontier Act, renamed, it contains $2 billion to promote domestic production of computer chips, semiconductors. There is $50 billion in President Biden's infrastructure plan, and there is, it appears, fairly broad bipartisan support to take the $2 billion and make it $50 billion in the USICA. The tech companies are pushing hard for that. There's not a lot of opposition at the moment, other than folks that are worried about the budget. And so the $2 billion for chips at the moment is likely to become considerably more before all is said and done. A bunch of cybersecurity and AI provisions in the USICA. The entire Title II of the bill focuses just on cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. It includes provisions calling on the federal government to follow certain principles when developing artificial intelligence systems. Those principles are informed by IEEE's ethically aligned design. Doesn't say IEEE's ethically aligned design, but they are consistent with it, and we have used the IEEE ethically aligned design program to educate congressional staff on how to do this. And so there is a direct connection between those two. And I wanted to particularly call out the AI Scholarship for Service Act. There are a lot of these provisions in the USICA, bills designed to help train people to work in the STEM field. Like I said, most of these are for college students, postdocs, but they also do include community colleges, which we think is a good idea, and just job training programs, which is also a good idea. There's language in there to do that with cybersecurity and AI, both of which are necessary and good, and we applaud their inclusion. Couple provisions pertaining specifically to university researchers, which I wanted to highlight. Excuse me. S1169, the Strategic Competition Act of 2021, is one of those bills that has been tacked into the Endless Frontier Act. Among many other things, the bill gives the Committee on Foreign Investments, which is an agency of the federal government, the authority to review and reject contributions to universities of over $1 million from China. Currently, those contributions are supposed to be reported in most cases. This provision would tighten the rules, make disclosure mandatory, and give the federal government some oversight over them. The Safeguarding American Innovation Act, S 1351, among many other things, strengthens and clarifies rules for for researchers using federal research grants and their interaction with foreign governments. Currently, researchers are required to disclose when they receive things from foreign governments, but there's a lot of question about what has to be disclosed, when it has to be disclosed, is the de minimis rules. This provision would clarify that, would also strengthen the punishments, the penalties, should researchers fail to disclose money they've received from foreign governments. Also includes a strict prohibition, the Endless Frontiers Act does, for participating in foreign talent recruitment programs. Talent recruitment programs, again, there's some questions about what exactly that means in law, but what Congress is trying to do, China has used its talent recruitment program to essentially hire American researchers and American academics to work within Chinese universities, whether it's to go to China to teach a class, to help build a department, to set up research facilities. China has been aggressive about going after American talent to help build up their own research capacity. This provision in the Endless Frontiers Act would prohibit that. These provisions are fairly popular in Congress, and my understanding from talking to the university groups is that the universities are not opposing them. They're just asking for greater clarity on some of the provisions. The idea is the universities are happy to comply, but they need to know what exactly the law is that they're complying with before they can be expected to do it, which seems fairly reasonable. On a non-Endless Frontier Act note, just a reminder about the PRO Act. This is the union organizing bill that contains rules for defining independent contractors. The PRO Act currently has 47 Democratic co-sponsors. Senators Kelly and Sinema from Arizona and Warner from Virginia have declined to co-sponsor so far. Senator Schumer has promised that if all 50 Democrats sign on as co-sponsors, then he will bring the bill up for a vote. We've had a number of conversations with Senate staff about the bill, and so far it does not look like the Senate is terribly interested in amending the bill, which is a problem because as written, the PRO Act would make it very difficult for most independent technology consultants in the United States to continue to be consultants. If you are your company, if it's just you as a consultant, the PRO Act is going to make it very difficult for you to continue to do your job. Not impossible, depends on exactly what kind of work you do, but it will make it difficult. And that's, of course, a problem. Those of you who are independent contractors should contact your legislators and let them know that you are worried about this. I can tell you that the Senate has not heard from very many individual contractors talking about the specifics of the bill. So this is something we're watching now. There is not any, it does not look like this bill is going to move imminently. It does look like the Senators Kelly, Sinema, and Warner have kind of dug in their heels, but that could change fairly quickly. And so we need to keep an eye on this. Just to clarify, IEEE-USA is not opposed to the PRO Act. We just want some amendments to make it possible for independent technology consultants to continue to do their jobs. Couple updates. There's a very good op-ed in Roll Call. For those of you who don't know, Roll Call is a Washington, D.C. publication that covers Capitol Hill. There's a link there. It's probably easier if you just Google Roll Call and Congressman Quigley. But what he has done, Congressman Quigley from Illinois, he defends defining the electrical grid and the internet as infrastructure projects for the purposes of President Biden's infrastructure plan. That op-ed which I wish we could take credit for, but we can't, is very, very close to exactly what IEEE-USA believes and has been arguing on this. So we appreciate the fact that the Congressman has spoken up in defense of the electrical grid and the internet. And as the infrastructure bill starts moving forward, and so far there hasn't been a lot of kind of public action on that. But as it does start moving, which it will do over the summer, we look forward to working with Congressman Quigley to make sure that funds for the electrical grid and internet remain in the bill. There is a growing debate. It hasn't really reached the point of kind of public policymakers in Congress or the administration, but it's growing given the Colonial Pipeline shutdown from a couple weeks ago, over whether it should be illegal to pay ransomware pay ransomware people to get access to your systems. It does look like Colonial Pipeline did pay the ransom to get the ransomware people to unlock their systems. A lot of people have concerns about that. In normal hostage-taking situations, federal law enforcement agencies generally argue that ransom should never be paid. It only encourages more illegal activity. But it is quite common in ransomware attacks for a number of reasons. And there's a growing debate about whether the government should step in and prohibit companies from paying ransomware attacks to open up their systems. Like I said, that hasn't gotten to Congress yet, but it will. And so IEEE-USA is starting to think about what we think about that particular question. Lastly, President Biden's budget is expected on May 27th, next week. You will recall last month, the president unveiled his what's called a skinny budget, which was sort of just a story about where his priorities were, which is an important first step, but it wasn't the full budget. We're expecting the full budget next month. This used to be a big deal. Fact of the matter is, Congress over the last, probably starting about 10 years ago, but certainly over the last 4 or 5, hasn't paid too much attention to the president's budget, and they probably won't this year either. But it's still an important start to the federal budget season. Our next update will be June 11th. Please note that that is in 3 weeks. We're going to go back onto our regular schedule after we had to shift to this update. We're also trying to avoid Memorial Day week since we figure a lot of people won't be around. June 11th will be right in the middle of legislative session. We should have a very clear understanding of where the Endless Frontier Act is, as well as a look at the president's budget, but also a better idea of what the infrastructure bill will look like. And I'm Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. My phone number is 202-530-8326. My email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat on your screen. And while you're doing that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see what you all are writing. Hold on one second. There we go. So Brendan Godfrey asks, what would money for academic tech transfer programs fund? And currently the bill is pretty open-ended. In other words, anything universities think they need to do to commercialize technology that they've produced or any innovation they've produced would be allowed. So that can be used for research, kind of SBIR funds. It can be used for business plans. It can be used for, whatever you need to do to get a business going. Some of it would be used on lawyers, particularly dealing with intellectual property protections. Sorry. But the bill is pretty open-ended that universities can do what they want with it, what needs to be done with it, so long as it's, of course, tied to tech transfer. So Brendan also asks, should we contact our senators to advocate for the USICA? You can. However, USICA is almost certainly going to pass the Senate. Usually I don't encourage IEEE members to contact Congress unless I only do that when there's something in doubt. Like I said, there was a cloture vote on the bill last week, or earlier this week rather. that passed with 71 votes. That's an 11 votes more than they need, which does strongly suggest that the bill is going to pass. The more important, there's never a wrong time to interact with your senators and your congresspeople about these bills. So now is good and helpful. The key, however, will be as the House starts to move their bill, which takes a different approach, one which it's a good approach, but it's not as good as what the Senate has done. Or if provisions like the regional technology hubs get stripped from the bill at some point. So we will be aggressively stepping up our messaging to the Hill before the conference committee, probably, to strengthen Senator Schumer's hand in negotiating with the House. Chuck, the timeline for Chuck Thorpe, one of our policy committee chairs, the timeline for setting up the new NSF Tech Directorate, the funding is for next year. So, of course, the bill has to pass first, which it has not done. Final passage is July is optimistic, probably. There will be delays, but it will probably be earlier this year than December. But then there'll be a lag after the law is signed by President Biden between then and when they can start spending money, which will be in fiscal 2022. Keeping in mind, fiscal 2022 starts on October 1st. Then there'll be a lag as, they got to hire someone, they got to find a directorate, they got to create kind of the regulations for the thing. So there's a lot of bureaucratic stuff that has to happen before we actually have a new tech directorate. However, assuming the bill passes relatively soon, summer, early fall this year, you would expect the tech directorate to be up, hiring, and starting to function before the end of 2022. Its budget for 2022, as I mentioned earlier, is fairly small, anticipating the fact that it simply won't have the institutional capacity to actually do very much. You got to find office space, you got to get computers, you got to hire people, you got to create some protocols for spending money. So there's a lot of things that have to happen before it could be effective. But it should start working next year if we can get it passed, which is pretty exciting. That tech directorate represents a fairly significant change in government policy. Up until now, NSF policy has been everybody gets funded the same. It's the NSF's decision where the priorities are, not Congress's. And those decisions should be made by researchers, not politicians. The tech directorate will focus attention on the 10 targeted research areas, which we've talked about before, most of which are technology-based. Will allow us to focus our advocacy efforts on those specific areas, and will make it easier for Congress to fund specific research programs they think are important, things like artificial intelligence and quantum computing. So it does represent a fairly substantial change in policy, which IEEE-USA fully supports. All right, I'm checking. I don't think we have any other comments today. All right. As always, I'm Russ Harrison. Phone number 202-530-8326. Email address is r.t.harrison@ieee.org. If you have any questions between now and June 11th, feel free to reach out. Always happy to talk with IEEE members about what's going on in Washington. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Hope your early summer is going well. Have a wonderful Memorial Day, and we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks. Thank you.
I had the coolest job that any electrical engineer could ever have on the ground crew for Solar Impulse 2, the first solar-powered airplane to fly around the world only using the power of the sun. IEEE-USA has given me a competitive edge because of their support system. It is so much easier doing something and being out of your comfort zone when you have someone there saying, "You got this." IEEE-USA is more than just a network. It's a family.